January the 6th, 2021 may easily go down as one of the most important days in U.S. history. Citizens stormed the Capitol, many armed and some carrying pipe bombs, with the intent of overturning an election. For many, what happened at the Capitol was shocking, a kind of chaos many thought impossible in the U.S. If only there were some way to see this coming. Some superpower that could have given us the tools to prepare for this. Ow, what's that breaking through the clouds? It all makes sense now. The way to have predicted the violence at the Capitol is with common sense. Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm not the first, and I know I definitely won't be the last to try to understand what led to the violence at the Capitol. Call the violence whatever you'd like. An insurrection, a coup, divorced dads letting loose. The fact remains, it shows America is in a state of powder keg-ness? Powder keggery? We're close to exploding, you get what I mean. And if we have any hope of keeping this third world country with a Gucci belt from completely falling apart, we have to figure out what led to the violence in DC and change stuff fast. In my humblest of estimations, the violence in DC can, in part, be traced to the two-party system maintaining its power and to the market incentives of media companies. I'll explain what I mean by that's the video, that's what it'll be, me defending that position. Without further ado, let's go. Preamble. Disclaimers. There's a lot we could say led to the violence in DC. You could point to our overall aggressive culture as its roots, to algorithms sending folks down radicalization pipelines, and that's because the reality of politics is that stuff influences other stuff in a lot of different ways. That's a $10 phrase right there. So I don't want to say the points I'm discussing are the reason. These are just points I hadn't really seen folks dig into, so I figured I'd add my 2 cents. Also, I want to deter any both-sidesing. I am aware that market incentives exist for liberal media outlets, and that Democrats fight to keep their power too. I'm not absolving them of those flaws, but for the simple fact that it was Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol, I'm going to focus on conservatives in this video. Finally, I'll say this a few times, but I want to hammer it home up front. To say the folks in DC were driven due to market incentives is not to excuse their actions, but understanding what drives somebody to an act is necessary if we want to stop it in the future. And it seems the roots of the violence at DC are all systemic. So today, let's do as the late great Michael Brooks said and be ruthless with systems. Part 1. The two-party system and how it maintains power. At this point, we all get the two-party system, right? South Park had that douche versus a turd sandwich bit like 16 years ago. Americans are aware of how this works. And the American people are sick of it. Due to this frustration, every few years a third party comes in and threatens the two-party system. So to counter the third party, what do the two main parties do? There are some legislative ways they try to retain power, like making ballot eligibility strict, but the legality of third-party suppression can get messy. However, sending messages to voters about why voting third-party is a waste is much easier, and most importantly, there's no legal recourse for making claims like that. So the main tools of the two-party system end up being social, and Republicans need those tools big time. They're a minority demographic in this country, with a lot of their policies unfavored in the public and with their presidential nominees failing to get more than 47% of the vote but once since the 90s. They can gerrymander their way into House seats and can lean on the Senate to give them good numbers, but when it comes to presidential runs, Republicans have such slim paths to victory, they need to make sure as many conservatives as possible turn out to vote, or else their party starts to lose its access to some forms of power. Volunteers are also a factor in parties maintaining their power. The more people you can convince to come out on their days off to support your campaign through unpaid labor, the better. Small dollar donors are also important, as you can never have too much money for ad buys. But regular folks really need the little bit of money they have, so you need a strong message to win them over. For these reasons, sending a clear, urgent message to voters is the name of the game. There are many kinds of messages we could send, but evidence suggests fear tactics are the most effective message in American politics. A message of fear can give folks second thoughts about voting third party, evidenced by the drop-off of third-party votes in the 2020 election when the stakes were said to be quite high. A message of fear is also good at bringing in volunteers and small-dollar donations. It makes the election seem so dire folks feel inclined to help. Crafting a threatening enemy and sending a clear message of fear taps into the deepest recesses of our little lizard brains, and is proven to be an effective strategy after thousands of campaigns. Now you might be thinking, what might a message of fear look like? Well, like Bush did in '88, you could use your opponent's differing stance on criminal justice to say his victory would vastly increase crime and all the scary, murderous black people would be let out of jail. He didn't say it was only black criminals, he just kept happening to use examples of black criminals to drive his message of fear. I'm sure there's nothing to unpack there. That message, among others, proved pivotal to turning the 1988 race, but then you lose re-election to the largest third-party turnout in a generation, so you have to up your messages of fear to make sure those third-party votes stay with you. A bit later, you find yourself against a coalition of voters that appears insurmountable. So in the lead up to this guy's first midterms, you start saying shit like that the black guy with a vaguely Middle Eastern sounding name, who is a Christian by the way, is gonna enact Sharia law? You know, the religion associated with, but not exclusive to, the scary brown people in the Middle East. I'm sure there's nothing to unpack there, and that message has its advantages. Republican victories of the 2010 midterms can, in part, be attributed to the way this Islamic fear-baiting solidified conservative turnout. And since midterms infamously have low turnout, all Republicans needed was to ensure their voters felt scared enough to go out and vote. But then you might realize the 2016 election was partially decided by third-party voting, and with signs of high Democratic turnout in the next one, you have to make sure folks vote for you and not the ever-growing Libertarian Party. For those reasons, the progression of your fear-based messages might have you saying some weird shit like that your opponent will cancel God or something like that. Thank goodness we haven't reached that layer of hell yet.
Republican senators and congressmen will either vote to turn America into a godless, amoral,
no religion, no anything, hurt the Bible, hurt God.
Oh, sweetie, no. From these examples, we can see how messages of fear can win elections, and therefore help the two-party system maintain its power. This analysis might feel like it hinges on an insincere interpretation of politicians, that they don't believe a thing they say and they only say it to get political wins. But I would argue intent is irrelevant here. Whether you believe what you're saying has no bearing on a message's effectiveness. It either works or it doesn't. And since messages of fear have duplicitous impacts on elections and have proven effective at winning, they seem to be here to stay. But the follow-up question the two parties never seem to stop and ask, what happens when you spend months or decades building up an opponent as a threat, and then you lose? If you tell folks God will be killed if your opponent wins, what might your voters feel inclined to do if your opponent is about to get sworn into office? Part 2. Media companies and market incentives. In a market economy, the goal is to maximize profit. High profits allow companies to expand their operations, it gives them leverage to make deals in their favor, and helps put distance between themselves and the competition. With profitability being key to running a business, whatever's profitable usually drives the market. People cross their fingers and hope whatever's profitable happens to be good for society, or hope that people's conscience would step in if something bad happens to be profitable. Like we'd hope if baby blood made really good toner, the economy wouldn't start a big baby industry to harvest baby blood. But the reality is profitability often doesn't map onto the good outcome. I'll give you a quick example. Back in your grandpappy's day, people bought reusable glass bottles for soda, and they'd just take it to the soda shop to get a refill. Same goes for milk. The now alien concept of a milkman was that a dude would come around every day in a truck and fill up your reusable glass bottles of milk. Just leave it on your stoop at night and bada bing, bada boom, you got some cow tit juice. This system was efficient in a lot of ways, like how it saved resources, but you know what it didn't do? Maximize profits. Companies realized they could make way more money if each soda was an individual bottle instead of relying on the refill system. And we can see how this shift toward disposable single-use items directly leads to harm, evidenced by the Texas-sized trash island in the Atlantic. But this model is, above all else, more profitable. And since profitability comes before concerns for societal impact, it became how we did business. I use this example to say that the profit motive from time to time leads us to these less than stellar places. And another sector we see this flaw is news media. There was a weird trend in the 80s of networks bringing in sports producers to manage their news, and the long-term result seems to be favoring captivating narratives and a fast pace over journalism, style over substance. But these sports producers helped ratings shoot through the roof, so they became the norm. And it makes sense why it's profitable. You know what's boring? These thick newsletters my mom and grandpa would get that go into the details of tax plans and foreign policy and shit. Most folks don't have the time or energy to digest those. But an exciting car chase or an impassioned rant on the nightly news? That right there is ratings gold. Higher ratings mean the advertisers pay more. Advertisers paying more means the network makes more money. Ergo, flashy news maximizes profit. And we can see how these market incentives impact coverage. This summer's BLM protests were like 91% nonviolent, but a lot of folks associate words like looting with them, because even networks that took a sympathetic stance toward the largest civil rights protest in history spent a lot of time showing footage of the violent parts, as the violent stuff is more ratings-friendly and engaging to talk about. So the coverage, which is part of setting the narrative, was largely or partially set by market incentives. Which isn't even to get into how the violent parts were intentionally maximalized for political purposes. So it seems we were already trending towards superficial hyperbole in our news media. And then came the internet.
They will take your job away. They will come for your parents. You will do something wrong, they'll fire your mom.
That's my first train trip as a man spreader. I just feel like a monster already.
Hillary, reportedly, I was told people around her that they think she's demon-possessed.
Bernie Sanders does have a sort of physicality, when he talks, that is a shaking your finger at Hillary Clinton, shaking your finger, shovey, weirdy,
The reason there's so many gay people now is because it's a chemical warfare operation.
And Churchill said, how can it be? You got the greatest army in Europe. How can it be over? He said, it's over.
Due to internet algorithms that favor engagement, stories pick up traction for causing visceral reaction. So what drives clicks, and therefore maximizes profits, is often not sound journalism, but hyperbole, outrage, and making every story feel life-threatening. To dig into this outrage trend a little bit, I'll give a quick recent example. Joe Biden, a few days before time of writing this, proposed a stimulus bill, which includes a $1,400 relief check. People took issue with the fact that they promised $2,000 checks in the election and seemed to be, technically-ing themselves out of having to send $2,000. And it was immediately a topic of discussion on social media. And the folks who were mad are valid. That's a really Weasley way to get elected and then not have to use up much political capital. But you know what that outrage driven by media algorithms missed? The other neat stuff in the bill, like unemployment insurance and increased money for vaccines. That stuff is all neat, but a nuanced analysis of what's good and bad in the bill doesn't necessarily trend, whereas the outrage over the $1,400 checks gets more people talking and engaging with the topic, which makes it more so optimal to maximize profits from. As my example shows, this isn't just a right-wing media issue, it's an issue with how our media algorithms and markets operate generally. But it is really bad on the right.
Satanic rituals, royal family, mainstream news, folks.
Due either to their passions or the fact that the ad revenue helps these folks buy more Rolexes, their hyperbole is off the charts. Men wanting to wear dresses in a photo shoot is no longer just a fashion trend, it's a sign that Marxism is taking over the West and will inevitably lead to our downfall. It's hard to scroll through right-wing media without seeing hyperbolic ideas of what a world under slim democratic control would be.
They'll never stop coming. They will take your job away. They will come for your parents. You will do something wrong, they'll fire your mom. They'll come to your house with fireworks and guns, and Americans will still just say, please, just leave me alone.
I want folks to really think about this clip for a sec, about its unrealistic claims that somebody's just gonna come by and cancel your family. All of it spoken in such rich passions. And the guy from that clip isn't just some nobody. Tim Pool is one of the largest political creators on YouTube. And rants like these aren't antithetical to his content. They're part of what got him his large audience. He's infamous for making the most innocuous things into videos about how a civil war is inevitable. I wonder what that message might lead people to do. Reactionary hyperbole has been around for a while, but these headlines and video titles have really blown up post-Gamergate. That's like a decade of a well-oiled multimedia apparatus using website algorithms to feed people constant fear while simultaneously raking in the big bucks from that exact content. It really can't be overstated how, when the media you consume tells you that every little thing Democrats try to do will lead to utter destruction and the death of everything you hold dear, what reaction can be expected except... Part 3. Conclusion. The more I mull over the violence in DC, the more it felt so predictable. When you spend decades saying everything your opponent does is radical Maoist, Cuban, scary socialism, when every step taken to break gender or sexuality boundaries is called a threat to masculinity or the fabric of Western civilization, and when these messages are pumped not just from a political party, but through a media apparatus, what else can you expect than for your followers to violently lash out? To say what happened at the Capitol is predictable is not to say it's forgivable, but it does mean that fixing this mess we're in requires coming to terms with what brought us here. And part of what brought us here are the incentives of media markets and the two-party system. To fix what happened, we have to confront the flaws of these power structures. For starters, it means these institutions have to make choices to prioritize authenticity over outrage. Now that's never going to happen because they'd lose the ratings game and somebody else would step in to fill that void in the market. Like how Newsmax and One American News Network started to jump in when Fox started to be slightly less than unquestioning of Donald Trump. But that doesn't make it any less necessary of a step. It's also on Republicans to tone down the red alerts. A Joe Biden victory does not mean God will be over. If you disagree with a Democrat, fine, I do it all the time. But don't stir up your base with outrageous claims just because you want to get a few more volunteers and donations and you want to scare people away from the Libertarian Party. People will try to both sides this conversation, and as I said before, these problems apply across the markets. But those who stormed the Capitol don't watch CNN. The guys who beat a cop to death with a fire extinguisher don't read Mother Jones, the New York Times, or BuzzFeed. And the ones waving Confederate flags around don't take their cues from Democrats. The men and women who stormed the Capitol on January 6th are the product of a conservative media and political apparatus incentivized to make it sound like the sky is falling. It's on them to make this right. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to toss me one of them likes and subscribe down below. Make sure to ring that little bell and set the notifications to all so you can know the exact nanosecond I release my next video. Shout out to all my big, wrinkly-brained patrons, like those whose names are currently on screen. On top of supporting the channel, patrons get early access to material and are rewarded with exclusive content. So make sure to join me over on Patreon if you want in on all those goodies. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter, where I occasionally make a good point. Thanks much, and I'll see you next time.